Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We apologize about the room change, but if Annaleah has not done this, we'd be waiting until 5 o'clock because Ways and Means is in our scheduled room before all three. Let's go ahead and start, if that's okay with everybody, and I know it is. Representative Cantrell, would you like to come forward and speak to your bill? We do have a substitute.
We do.
Yeah.
So you should have a substitute. It's
Oh, okay.
LC 432337S.
HR 842.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just speak to the changes to the bill, and then if anybody has any questions, I feel like we did a pretty comprehensive cover during the last meeting. The sub has made two changes to the bill. The first is we addressed Representative Wilkerson's concerns about the constitutionality, and it's very explicitly laid out for you on lines 15 through 17. And then secondly, we changed the effective date to July 1 of next year. It was January 1 of 24, now it's July 1. January 1, 25. Now we moved it up a full year and a half to give the budgeting time to add this additional expense to the budget should the voters choose to pass this bill, this resolution. Thirdly, we had talked about the 60% versus 2/3. And just quite frankly, as I've talked to everybody and tried to talk to as many of you as I could, it was obvious that we did not have a consensus. So I decided to leave it at 60%, and I'm wide open to an amendment if someone wanted to. I'm happy to defer to the committee on whether we stay with 60% or move it to 2/3.
It sounds like you're fishing to me. What number are you? Oh, 6. Representative McLaurin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the presentation, at least that I caught. The sense I get, though, and I just want to kind of refresh this for the committee to make sure I'm getting this right. When you came up with the 60% number, you were basing it in part on a study done of the amount of work in state legislatures across the country that determined that in Georgia, the extent of a legislator's job is roughly 2/3.
At least 2/3.
At least 2/3 of a full-time job, right? So
that's correct.
Thank you. And the reason I clarify that is, if in the event that I make said amendment, I just want to be clear that my intention is to tether that to the study that motivated you to pick the number 60 in the first place.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
accurate.
you for that. Okay.
Okay, Representative Tarvin, are you on 3 and 4?
Well, I'm not.
Oh, okay. They don't. Well, they're blinking up here. Do you have a question, want to speak?
I'm just good enough.
Oh, okay.
I did, but
You just got your tail lights on, right?
I came up with my own answer.
Boy, that. All right. Any other questions? Do I hear any amendments? Representative McLaurin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose it's going to be a couple because I'm going to do an amendment that includes both changing 60% to 2/3 in the text, which would be at line 19, and then it'll also be in the ballot language that's proposed that is corresponding to that. So what I would propose is on line 19.
And the header?
Line 3.
Correct, that's right. Also in line 3. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. So let's start with line 3. It would be strike 60%, and it would be add the words 2/3 in its place. On line 3 to start with? Is that what you asked? Okay. And then the next one would be line 19. Strike 60%, add the words 2/3. And then it would finally be line 41, strike the words 60% and add the words 2/3. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
And that's the reason is to keep in line with the South State.
I appreciate the question. I think that the author's intention is to use that study as a basis for setting our benchmark. And so if the study says 2/3, I think it's, and again, that's a floor, that's a minimum.
If I could add to this, though, my thinking was if the study recommends 2/3, then for us to come in a little underneath that would be a smart play. Did I say that the right way?
Yeah, that's close enough.
Well, and you know, I'm thinking of other policy considerations as well with
That's
regard
fair.
to, you know, all the things we've discussed with regard to salary. And so I guess what seems appropriate is to at least tee it up for a vote of the committee, you know, which angle to take, but I just wanted to tee up that
I have no problem with that.
vote. Okay, so that's the amendment.
Wait a minute. If I understood the author, you want up to 2/3. Is that correct?
No,
No?
the study said that they did at least 2/3 of a full-time job.
This is equal to.
So that was the study. We're
Right.
saying to the floor of that study then would be 2/3. So it would be
Okay, so you're okay with
2/3.
his amendment?
I am.
Okay. Representative Wilkinson, what number are you?
Thank you. So in your travels throughout the chamber, did you get a consensus on 60% or
No,
2/3?
I think it was before you came in. I was telling the committee that it was a complete non-consensus.
I've got two more questions.
Okay.
So for those that were comfortable with 60%, or the 66%, 2/3, I'm assuming they were okay with the 60%, right? Like they wanted more, but they wouldn't complain about getting 60%.
That's correct. Nobody's going to vote no. I didn't get the impression that anybody voted no based on these two numbers.
Okay, but the 66% would cause people heartburn. The 2/3 would cause some of us heartburn, including myself.
If you're stating that, then yeah, then
Yeah,
that's
I mean that's why some of us probably said
the
we'd
actual
rather
dollar
66%.
amount is almost negligible. It's about $2,000.
Yeah, it's a couple of $1,000s. So you're talking about heartburn versus a
just-
study that says 2/3. I'm sure I could find other studies that say we barely work. So I agree with the 2/3. I just
Well, and
personally I'm more comfortable with 60%. But
if I might, I'm in favor of the 60%, but I'm okay with it if the committee wants to go with 2/3. But if I had a vote on the committee, which I don't, I would vote against the amendment in a very friendly way.
I respect your vote, and I will take that for you.
Well said.
Although it is on my bucket list to have a McLaurin amendment on one of my bills.
Representative McLaurin.
It is.
Well, his light,
I'm 2/3.
your light was blinking. Josh, are you through?
If I have properly moved my amendment, then yes, I've concluded my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, statements, or thoughts? Okay, then, let's move the motion first, the bill. All those in favor of the bill as amended, 842?
Do we have a motion?
I want a motion. Motion to move? Yeah, and then we'll consider the amendment. We could do it either way, but this is, yeah. Motion move, second? Second, okay. Now, on to the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, amendment carries.
That was a weak
So now
no.
to the main motion. All those in favor of HR, substitute to HR 842 as amended, say aye.
Just a question real quick, if I may, before we vote on it.
Sure.
Would it be, at what time, if we're gonna do an amendment, like to change the title of the bill to the Cantrell McLaren
No,
compensation bill?
no, we're not going that far.
Oh, okay, all right, I apologize.
We're at the edge of the cliff where we are now, I think.
We are. Yes, we are.
All those in favor of HR 842 substitute amended, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? You got your bill.
Now,
Bill
Mr. Chairman,
passes.
since no one is here from Ledge Council, what's the procedure on getting that language? Is that something that you handle for me, or is that something I need to handle?
The amendment fails.
By default.
Kara tell you.
Okay, we'll chat. Okay.
We can do it. Okay. Next up, Representative Camp has House Resolution 894.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for hearing this resolution today. I bring to you House Resolution 894, LC 432182. This resolution came to be after much discussion. Representative Lim and I have another bill we'd been working on diligently, which was an overview committee on funds that had been spent from the recent unanticipated funds federally that had come into the state. Upon further discussion with the budget office, it came to our attention that we've only had 3 times in the history of our state that we've had unanticipated federal funds. They were the Depression, the Great Recession, and during the pandemic. So it's not as if these funds come in all the time. But because of some things that have transpired, I have a letter that dated back in 1933. The funds that come into the state at that point that are unanticipated historically have gone to the governor's office to be dispersed. But upon looking further at the Georgia Constitution, it clearly indicates that those funds should be allocated by the General Assembly. So this resolution actually says anything over $100 million unanticipated funds that the Georgia General Assembly, starting on line 23, any exceeds $100 million for a fiscal year, the General Assembly shall be entitled to specifically appropriate all or some of such funds through one or more methods or manners as shall be prescribed by general law. And we certainly will work with Legislative Council to make that happen. But this is a constitutional amendment, so it would be on the ballot in November if approved by this committee and by rules in the House and Senate. And at that point in time, the people would make the determination on how those funds would be appropriated, if they would stay as they are, or if the General Assembly would have that responsibility. In my personal opinion, 236 is better than 1, but we'll wait. Let's see what the people of Georgia have to say. I'm open to any questions.
All right, number 16. I'm not sure who that is down there.
It's me. So your favorite legislator. Beth, thank you for bringing this bill, Representative Camp. My question, I guess I have 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what the governor's office thinks about the bill. Although obviously that's not going to, necessarily determine what we'd move with it. But my second question is, the $100 million dollar figure. Let me clarify. I completely agree with what you're doing. The fund should be appropriated by the General Assembly. I mean, that's how the budget initiates in the House. That's how it should be. But I think that every dollar should be appropriated by the General Assembly. And so my question is, where do we come up with the $100 million threshold? And is there a specific reason why that was the dollar amount picked?
Well, I sat down with Betsy, and her guesstimation was $100 million triggers a whole litany of other acts that take place in the governor's office at that point. It could be $1. The number could be amended to any point. Any dollar. And that certainly would be, I would be open to that.
And I respect that, that you got to start somewhere. So I know that that's where it was, but my argument would be, I guess, to the committee, my argument to you would be if all of a sudden next year we get a $12 million COVID supplement or whatever it is, that should be allocated, in my view, should be allocated by the General Assembly, not by the executive branch. And so I think proper role of government would dictate that we recommend that every dollar. That's my 2 cents. But what did the governor's office say? I think I missed that part.
Well, they were not terribly thrilled, but they didn't tell me it was the worst thing that ever happened either. It being a constitutional amendment, the fact of the matter is 10 years from now, we're going to have a different governor. Doesn't matter what happens in the November race. And $100 million, if it's 50 years before we get more funds, $100 million might be like $10 million now. So I definitely see the prudence in if there was a motion for an amendment to $1, I would not be objectionable to that.
Okay. Representative Wilkinson.
Thank you. I guess for the author, a couple of questions, and this may require more than one discussion, but one, what is unanticipated federal funding? I mean, is that, like, is there a definition of that?
There actually is a definition. It's anything that is out of the norm. There's not a schedule for it. The state was not anticipating those funds, such as they anticipate funds for Medicare. They anticipate funds for Department of Transportation. They anticipate various funds for various things. This is something they had no idea the money was coming. And it's not a slight to the governor's office at all, but there was this pot of money, and it's taken a long time for some of these funds to be given out, and there's still more to be given. And it's just the opportunity for the General Assembly to have more transparency in allocating those funds. If they were done much like we do other things, where they're on a budget, even if it's a supplemental budget, it would still be very transparent for everyone to see. And the next year, the budget obviously wouldn't have those because they were one-time unanticipated funds.
Okay, and like, I guess I just have questions going forward. I mean, it's $100 million for the fiscal year, and I'm not sure what's going on with this corner right now, but we're on the same page. But suppose you get $50 million in one tranche and $50 million in the next tranche. Do you go back and reallocate all of that, or the $100 million just seems kind of arbitrary? And would the transportation package be unanticipated funds? I mean, like those type packages where they pass a bill and send the money to us.
No,
I'm just
no.
curious.
No, it would not be. We have an ongoing budgetary program for DOT funds, for Medicare funds, for a whole litany of funds that come federally. But the money that was given in the CARES and ARPA, most specifically, those are a whole different animal because they had some requirements, like they would be used for infrastructure. But outside of that, the parameters were set by the state. This bill would make the parameters be set by the General Assembly versus the governor's office.
I'd like to say something. I think Representative Wilkinson has brought up a very good point. We do receive unanticipated funds from time to time, and so to the committee, I would say $100 million may be the right number. That's an unusual amount, but I think if we hog tie ourselves to any amount, to anything over $1, we could be looking at a problem. Representative Gilligan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Camp, I'm curious, on line 25 of the resolution, it's to specifically appropriate all or some of such funds. Is there a reason that it's all or some of such funds?
Yes. The reason being that when we're not in session, for example, when the schools, let's just backtrack, when the schools needed PPP equipment for their kids to go back to school during the pandemic, the governor's office could have allocated specific parts of that, as the CARES Act did say it could be used for those. So he could have given the money for that, and then we could have come back in and allocated the rest of the funds.
Okay, and follow up if that's okay. Mr. Chairman, a follow-up question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the follow-up is, just to make sure I'm understanding, when we have a declaration of emergency, a tornado rips through the state, those funds, we don't have to wait for the legislative body to come in to allocate those emergency funds.
No, and that would be line 26, methods and manners that shall be prescribed by general law. If this were to pass, if the citizens of the state of Georgia agree this is a good idea, we would come back and we would create the framework. So this would be a doable plan. Us being in session 40 days a year, we're not a full-time, year-round legislature, but that should not negate our responsibility to appropriate funds. So we would definitely create a framework for that if this were to pass.
Okay.
Representative Gamble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say that I think the $100 threshold, to me, it's similar to the scenario we have over at the Department of Education. The state school superintendent can spend up to $50,000 without board approval, and then anything above that has to go through the board. And so I think the $100 million is reasonable as far as a starting point.
Okay, thank you so much.
No other lights are on. Okay. Representative Wilkinson.
Thank you. Just one more question.
Yes, sir.
On lines, and like I said, on lines 25, it says we can appropriate all or some. Who determines what all or some is?
Well, again, that would be, if there was a tornado that something happened, as Representative Gilligan said, at that point in time, emergency funds could be allocated if the framework of how we set this up allows the governor to do that, which I'm assuming we would because we're not in session full time. On the flip side of it, the funds for infrastructure were longer term funds, and it's taken months, and months, and there's more rounds to go. So it's a very different framework for emergency, getting tarps and medical equipment to a specific area versus allocating funds for infrastructure.
Representative Gilligan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, actually, this is a question for you, and that would be, we had some questions around the $100 million point. Is it within the time frame that we could consider tabling this and still take it up in time, or do we need to continue to go forward and see about perhaps changing it as it goes forward? I don't like to vote on something that needs to be fixed, but I also don't, I know we're coming up on deadlines.
We are on the deadline, and I think that we will take a vote on this bill. And unfortunately, I understand what you're saying, but we are on a deadline. Yeah.
And I appreciate you, sir.
Sure. Yes, go ahead, Singleton.
Thanks. I like the bill. I'm happy to vote on it with the $100 million threshold. It's fine to me. It sounds like it's not, I respect the wisdom of the colleagues not to lower the limit. My big concern is, it's the stuff I can't see about this that I want to make sure that we're right on. For example, if the federal government allocates funds for a specific purpose, I want to make sure that we're not trying to say constitutionally that we can redirect or reallocate those funds.
No.
And I know, with a lot of the COVID funding, some of it came with very, very specific strings, and some of it came with essentially no strings, just infrastructure.
Right.
And so my challenge, I guess, to you, Beth, to you and Mr. Chairman, is to, when it goes to rules, if we vote on it, assuming that we pass it out of committee, that someone way smarter than me has gotten a chance to really look at that and make sure that there's not a line that needs to get put in there, or a wicket, to make sure that we're saying essentially those fungible funds that are not very specifically tied. Does my concern make sense?
It totally makes sense, Representative Singleton. And I think entitled to specifically appropriate all or some, sometimes the appropriation is going to be the fact that there are strings attached. The money must go to this, or the federal government will take it back. They don't just leave you with money and you not do the right thing. They will take their money back. So I will discuss with Legislative Council if this were to pass committee, to find out what we can do to perhaps alleviate some of the inconsistencies that you're bringing up, because there are going to be times when there's specifically earmarked funds, as you said, and there's other times where it's infrastructure, and infrastructure is very broad. So most definitely, I'll definitely sit down with Legislative Council and see what we can do to shore this up some.
Yes, ma'am. And then just let us know, because
We've seen it before where they'll come out and it'll turn out that, Mr. Chairman, and correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say that we do pass a constitutional amendment, it passed out of the House and the Senate, and then next year we'll come back with specific statutory language that kind of defines everything more precisely. It may be the case that this what is going to happen here, in which case, nobody's gonna have a problem with it. But I just want to make sure that we know what we got to do.
Well, your intention is mine is the same. I definitely don't want to lose any federal funds that our state could be using, but specifically, the Constitution does say that the General Assembly does allocate funds in the budget, so.
Yeah.
thank you.
I asked a question.
Representative Tarvin.
Somebody stole every question I had, but you just said something I've been sitting here thinking about. If it's already in the Constitution that they're not supposed to spend it, why are we not allocating it out of the House already?
There is a letter, and I would be glad to send it. I did not bring it today, but there is a letter from 2006, and that it clearly states that in 1933, some changes were made. Let's see. Encumbered funds moved beyond the powers of the General Assembly, and it's a case Busby versus Georgia General Assembly from 1975.
Okay, my only statement would be if it's in the Constitution, we just need to enforce the Constitution, and we may not need an amendment, but, or a bill, but that was my question, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Which number are you? Oh, one? Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
On line 11,
Yes.
the General Assembly shall annually appropriate those state and federal funds necessary to operate all the various departments and agencies. Can you describe what that looks like?
Well, sure. Well, see, it's not underlined, so it's already in code.
Right.
And we do a budget. And today, for example, we had a substitute for a budget, and it was line by line by line of every single thing we fund. And so it's just clearly stating that's one of the responsibilities we have as the General Assembly.
So those unanticipated funds would be allocated like we do our regular budget,
It would.
based on all the departments and agencies that would
Correct.
benefit from it.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I've got one last question. I know you're going to throw me out the window, and I'm sorry. Steve, I don't normally ask this many questions, but I think that Steve made a really good point. And my question would be, do we have to, if it's in the Constitution already, do we need a constitutional amendment, or can we just do a bill that explains in the statute how we need to apply it? The standards of passing that are significantly easier. It's a much lower bar. And why don't we just come in and say, look, when the Constitution says allocated, we mean everything, including unanticipated funding? Wouldn't that be a lot cleaner and easier way to do this? Just a thought.
It would be. It would be very simplistic. But if we pass a bill in the House and the Senate, then who has to sign it for it to be a law? Okay.
All right, go ahead.
The same 2/3 that would take to pass a constitutional amendment could override the governor's signature. So, in essence, we still need 2/3 no matter what.
Yes, we do.
And the question is, by raising it to 100 million, does that negate the ability of us to allocate below 100 million? If now that I think about it, because if it's already in the Constitution, are we changing the Constitution to actually take away power from us?
No,
Because I think we're all on the same page.
I don't think so, because if you look at line 33, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended as to entitle the General Assembly to specifically appropriate all unanticipated federal funding allocated to the state for a fiscal year if the sum of all such funds exceeds $100 million for a fiscal year. So it clearly states it's unanticipated, and it's the sum of. So if it was 50 and 50, then that's 100 million.
Representative Frazier.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Camp, let me ask you something.
Yes.
So you went back to 1930-something and
Yes.
found out that the Constitution states that these extra funds should be distributed by the General Assembly, but but you don't know how much money has been allocated since then, and you're saying that it's allocated every 10 years or plus or whatever. So now we going back to 1930, and so we went through 6, 7 governors. So are you saying that they have misappropriated this money
No,
in all
no.
these years,
No,
or they
ma'am.
have not? We should have been allocating this money, but the governors were doing it. I'm just
Well,
trying
we've
to
only received it 3 times in the history of our state. That was during the Depression, during the Great Recession, so it went 70 plus years between those 2 periods, and then during the pandemic. So we've only had 3 opportunities when this has happened in our history. And I mean, I'm sincerely hoping that it never happens again. But the reality is that it could. So it's happened now 3 times. So
And
it'd be
it's
kind of
happened
shame
be-
on us for not taking action.
Yeah, but it's happened, it happened 3 times, and 3 governors have dispersed the funding.
That's correct.
and inappropriately.
No, I'm not
according to
saying,
the Constitution.
I'm not saying it's inappropriate, but for various reasons, the governors did so. And now we have it within our power as a General Assembly to adhere to the Georgia Constitution, which says the House and the Senate, the General Assembly, has the ability and the right to allocate funds.
So why now?
Well, I just got here last year. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was on a school board where we were, you could go look at our checkbook any point in time. I loved that. It was so transparent, and I think that the people of Georgia deserve some more transparency. They're going to see you, and they're going to see me in a grocery store. Realistically, they're not going to see the chief executive of the state of Georgia at Kroger this Saturday. And they can talk to us about things. And if we have a hand in the allocation of funds, as we do, we all sign off on the budget, we all vote on the budget. If we do that, then I'm just thinking that we're going to have more transparency in our government, which is what I really want.
Thank you. That's a no.
Okay, the basics of this bill is if it exceeds $100 million, then we have some say-so on how it's spent. I think the people at home elect us to have that type of responsibility. So, and also, this allows the people to vote on this. This is really, anytime I believe that we allow the public to make decisions and vote on things, it's the right thing to do, you know? But anyway, that's my own comment. Are there any more questions or comments? Okay. Do I hear a motion? Motion. Second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. No. Let's do a show of hands. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those against, raise your right hand, same sign. 8 to 6 in favor. The bill passes.
Thank you very much.
ma'am.
Thank you, committee, for hearing me.
Appreciate the committee. Thank you all very much for coming today. Such short notice. Definitely come up for something.